Such was the Emden's impact that the British Admiralty later drew up this chart to track her movements. Muller even had the audacity to steam into the Indian port of Madras, as a crew member recorded in his diary.
22nd of September 1914, 9:30 p.m. The Emden sneaks closer and fires 125 shots. Some hit boats in the harbour. Huge columns of fire rise above the oil tanks. The coastal defences open fire, but they all fall short. 23rd of September. We are now 100 miles away. We can still see the fires at Madras.
In the City of London, freight rates and shipping insurance rocketed. At one point, the entire British trade fleet in the Bay of Bengal was kept in harbour rather than fall prey to dashing Captain Muller. Germany's rogue cruisers were starting to harm Britain's war effort.
3 transports are delayed in Calcutta through fear of Emden. This involves delaying transport of artillery and cavalry. The Cabinet took a strong view. The extirpation of these pests is a most important subject.
While the Emden ran the British ragged at one end of the Indian Ocean, 25 Royal Navy warships hunted the cruiser Königsberg at the other, off the coast of Germany's East African colony. She had raided Zanzibar and sunk a British light cruiser from her secret hideout in the Rufiji Delta. The frustrated British decided to strangle all her possible bases, starting with the port of Tanga. On the 2nd of November 1914, the British steamed into this bay. In the global war, imperial powers got others to do their fighting. Most of the British troops were Indian. Their arrival was closely watched by Thomas Planton, a 16-year-old African fighting for the Germans.
The approaching British ships had all their lights blazing and seemed to be making no attempt to conceal their presence. We were in position with machine guns, waiting in ambush for them, and many of them were killed when they started to come ashore. A lot of them were killed before they even got out of the water.
Thomas Plantin was one of 2,500 men under German commander Paul von Lettow-Vorbeck. The British thought taking Tanga would be a pushover, but they reckoned without Lettow. He was a professional Prussian soldier, hard as nails, charismatic.
Von Lettow was a remarkable soldier, but stubborn and single-minded to a degree I have fortunately never experienced before. His most remarkable quality was the reckless energy with which he pursued his goals. This was often covered up by his persuasive charm, which he could switch on if he wanted to.
On the ship to Africa, von Lettow had met Karen Blixen, who would later write Out of Africa. He clearly turned on the charm for her.
A German officer, von Lettow, who belongs to a very old Mecklenburger family, has been such a friend to me. You should hear how they talk about him out here, as the greatest genius of the age.
Despite losing men during the landing, the British now threatened Tanga. Governor Schnee ordered Lettow to evacuate the town rather than see it destroyed, but Lettow had come to Africa to fight.
It was crucial to prevent the enemy from gaining a foothold in Tanga, thus giving him a base from which to advance north. I couldn't let the governor's order to spare Tanga take precedence over this priority.
Lettow wrecked the British positions himself on his bicycle. He also called in reinforcements. 3 companies of German troops came by rail to Tanga. Here, on the 4th of November 1914, they met the British Indian soldiers, raw and poorly trained. British intelligence officer Richard Meinertzhagen watched the ensuing rout.
Half the 13th Rajputs turned at once, broke into a rabble and bolted. I could not believe my eyes. They were all jabbering like terrified monkeys and were clearly not for it at any price.
Everyone in the dense forest, friend and foe, was mixed up together, shouting in all sorts of languages. The enemy ran off in wild disorder, and our machine guns mowed down whole companies to the last man.
Von Lettow was based here, at the German hospital. After 2 days of heavy fighting, the British sent Richard Meinertzhagen to negotiate a surrender.
The Germans were kindness itself and gave me a most excellent breakfast, which I sorely needed. We discussed the fight freely as though it had been a football match. It seemed so odd that I should be having a meal today with people whom I was trying to kill yesterday. It seemed so wrong, and made me wonder whether this really was war, or whether we'd all made a ghastly mistake. The German officers were all hard-looking, keen and fit. They treated this war as some new form of sport.
The British failed to take Tanga and suffered 700 casualties. Lettow lost just 65. Germany hailed him as a hero.
A German David is fighting alone against the British Goliath in Africa. If we cannot fight by his side, at least we must make sure that he is well supplied with shot for his sling.
But the British blockade of Germany prevented reinforcements reaching Lettow. Further east, across the Indian Ocean, Muller was still causing havoc. He'd sunk 2 warships and captured 23 merchant ships. On the 9th of November 1914, the Emden anchored at the Cocos Islands to destroy the British wireless station. But the radio operator spotted the Emden's bogus fourth funnel and put out a call for help. The Australian cruiser Sydney picked up the message and ended the Emden's maverick career. Captain Muller was taken prisoner. He and the other survivors were well looked after.
Dear loved ones, I'm well and healthy. The British were very friendly. They took loads of photos of us and asked for our addresses to send us the snaps. Yours, Walter.
Now, Admiral Graf von Spee's luck also ran out. Britain took the risk of detaching 2 of her latest battlecruisers from the crucial North Sea blockade of Germany to deal with him. On the 8th of December 1914, German commander Hans Pochhammer sighted their huge masts as they recoaled in Port Stanley on the Falkland Islands. He realized the Germans were outgunned and outpaced.
We choked a little at the neck. Our throats contracted and stiffened. For that meant a life and death grapple, or rather a fight ending in honorable death.
The German fleet tried to get away, but the British battlecruisers were too fast. At 1:25 p.m, Spee turned to face them. But the British were careful to stay out of range of his guns, firing their own from 16,000 yards. Lieutenant Harry Bennett on HMS Canopus watched what happened and painted these watercolours. At 4:17 p.m, the Scharnhorst went down with Admiral von Spee and all hands. At 6:02 p.m, the Gneisenau sank with most of its crew, including Spee's younger son Heinrich. His other son Otto was on the doomed Nuremberg.
The sight was one of fearful awe. She turned over and sank with a graceful gliding motion, as would a tumbler pressed over in a bowl of water. Those who went down in her were game to the end, for we saw a party of her men standing on the quarterdeck, waving the German ensign as she sank, and so they went down into their watery grave.
The Battle of the Falklands heralded the end of Germany's cruiser campaign. Her global war would increasingly have to be fought on land. Again, her commanders would stretch slim resources to lead the British Empire a dance. The Suez Canal presented a rare opportunity for Germany to harass the British Empire. A crucial British sea lane, vulnerable to attack by land forces. But Germany couldn't spare any men from the Western Front, so Berlin turned to Ottoman Turkey, her ally since November 1914. The Turkish Fourth Army was stationed in Palestine, just 150 miles from the Suez Canal. The Turks agreed to help capture Suez, assigning these 19,000 troops. They saw it as the first stage in their own reconquest of Egypt and Libya.
We marched at night and only by moonlight. My heart was filled with a deep melancholy, mingled with great hope of success. At the sound of the song, the red flag flies over Cairo, to the accompaniment of which the advancing battalions forged ahead over the endless waste of desert, feebly illuminated by the pale gleam of the waxing moon.
The Turks had to transport howitzers, floating pontoons, food and water across the Sinai Desert, and didn't lose a single man. In the early hours of the 3rd of February 1915, they reached the Suez Canal. The German colonel who'd planned the operation now watched it go horribly wrong.
A sentry noticed our attack and fired. The shots created panic. The English then blasted the banks with machine gun fire.
The Turks found the canal defended by 9 British warships and 30,000 Indian troops dug into defensive positions. The Ottoman troops suffered 1,200 casualties. The survivors retreated across the desert. The attack had failed, but Africa was now a battleground in Germany's global war. She had 3 bases of operations: the Cameroons, Germany East Africa, where Letov was still at large, and German Southwest Africa with its ports and wireless stations. Luckily for Britain, she had a colony right next door. Unluckily, it was the one whose loyalty she could least rely on. The Union of South Africa was racially diverse. Blacks, Boers, and British settlers. Just 15 years before, Britain had fought a long, bloody war against the Boers. Many still had little love for Britain. Their loyalty could not be counted on. As one commander told South Africa's Prime Minister, Louis Botha,
"My men are ready. Whom do we fight? The English or the Germans?"
But South Africa was ideally situated to launch an attack on German Southwest Africa. British Colonial Secretary Lewis Harcourt took the gamble.
If your ministers desire and feel themselves able to seize such part of German Southwest Africa as will give them the command of the wireless stations there, we should feel this was a great and urgent imperial service.
South Africa's government read